I just want to say a few words myself. Just firstly, that I'm very honoured to be able to come and speak today and to open and chair this event. It's a very important event for all the trade unions, not just in Wales but across the UK really. It's an important subject, and it's one we need to understand and actually make sure that our movement is actually taken up in the workplaces. And I think I won't go into too much depth myself, because obviously we have an array of very experienced and knowledgeable speakers here today who will give you an understanding and give you direction as to how we want to see this toolkit used. Toolkit, I have to say, from my own background, is a very important thing. I come from a manual background. I'm a coach builder by trade. I used to build lorries and then trains. I'm also an RT union official now, which is but I used to have a real job at one time, and that real job involved maintenance of lorries and then trains. And toolkits for me were a very important thing, because toolkits meant that all the knowledge and experience that I had and I learned, I could put into practice. I could do things, I could influence things and shape things. And toolkit, the word toolkit, I think is extremely important, because it's not just a document, it's not just something to put on a shelf, it's not just something of academic interest, it's something to be utilised and used. And I think that is going to be the key theme of how we want to see this toolkit used in the workplaces. As I say, my background as an apprentice in engineering, mainly a male environment, I have to say, and I have to say the culture that existed in the workplaces, particularly when I was doing my apprenticeship in the 1970s, was far from where we want to be. I was fortunate enough at age 17 to become a socialist and become a trade unionist and active in the movement. And I got an education there about the rights and wrongs in the world, about class struggle, about the fact that society is divided into classes, but then within that we also have discrimination against groups within society. Women being particularly the biggest group who face that type of discrimination in all forms of work, in the communities and often in the home as well. So that was not the best education in a workplace, and I learned to see what was bad about workplaces as an apprentice. And for a young man, particularly, because we're part of the massive part of the problem, but we're also part of the solution, is changing that culture. I'm a firm believer that culture can be changed. I know thousands of people within the movement who I've met, men within the movement who came from similar type backgrounds, and we're indoctrinated with a culture, really, because it's a sad culture sometimes that we used to have in workplaces and in society. But we are beginning to change, and we can change things. That's my belief, and I think this toolkit will give us an opportunity to go out to speak to reps, but educate and train them, and also make sure that they can use that toolkit in a practical, pragmatic way in the workplaces to change these things and call these issues out. To be just not allies to women, members of the trade union movement, but also to actually be advocates for change. And that's what men should be doing. And I hope today, and I'll finish my comment on this, is that for the men in the room, we need to be that person. We need to be going into the workplace and challenging these things. We need to challenge these things within the trade union movement itself, because we're not perfect. We have seen in recent times there are problems there. We know it's prevalent through every different aspect of society. Sexual discrimination and sexual exploitation and abuse is there all over. But we can change it, and we must change it. And I think that's the importance of this event today, is it's a launching pad really, for a toolkit that will arm and equip our reps to go into the workplaces and use, like any skilled person does, that toolkit to shape and change their own workplaces. So I will move on now from that to introducing our first speaker, which will be Jane Hutt, Minister for Social Justice. So I'll introduce you to, everybody will know Jane anyway, but welcome to the meeting, Jane.
Can I just start by thanking you, Brandon, for that brilliant speech. Can we give Brandon another big? It was just so good, the way you introduced that and spoke about your own experience and growing up and changing, because I mean actually this is such a key message for us today, so really pleased to be here, and so important that so many have come today as well. Congratulations to Wales TUC, the great team, but also Welsh Women's Aid and everyone who's taken part in this. But, you know, as I said, Brendan, thank you so much for what you say, because it's a real challenge that we've all got to embrace today. It is a launch of the Wales TUC Sexual Harassment in the Workplace Toolkit. We wouldn't be here without a lot of work. It's taken a long time, hasn't it, for us to get here, but I think it's very topical. It's very right that we're launching it now. We're getting it right. And it is about making this toolkit actually work out there, taking it from here. It's going to be an invaluable tool for trade union reps, as you said, Brandon, to actually support workers who are experiencing sexual harassment in the workplace, help union reps to identify sexual harassment and workplace cultures. We always say, in terms of tackling violence against women, domestic abuse and sexual violence, don't be a bystander. But it's a hard call, isn't it? Don't be a bystander, because you have to take that action often, which is tough and it is difficult. But also it's about being able to understand people's rights and the rights workers have, and recognising that's all our responsibilities. Crucially, it's going to enable union reps to hold employers to account and to drive that culture change, as you said, that culture change that prevents behaviour happening in the first place. So, you know, again, this piece of work is so important, not just here in Wales, but I know it'll be a really important resource much further afield, because it does shine a spotlight on an issue that's often still downplayed and ignored. But it's so important. It's supporting the drive to root out sexist and misogynist behaviour that's the cause and consequence of sexual harassment. And I was just looking at the introduction. I think it's so important what you say in introduction, because sexual harassment is part of a wider relentless culture of sexual violence and misogyny. As a global issue, it's dealt with differently across the world, but we have the opportunity to tackle this issue head on to make Wales the safest place to work, live and socialise. Such important words at the start of this document. So can I just pause for one moment to thank Joyce Watson, for her leadership as Senate member and Commissioner, you know, driving the whole Senate behind her in terms of our annual events on the International Day of Elimination of Violence Against Women, and bringing us forward in terms of employers to be white ribbon ambassadors. And I see Jack Sargent is here. I know he's got a very busy afternoon in the Senate, but it's so good that Jack also, as a lead white ribbon ambassador, always there, always speaking up, always showing that change. And I know that Jack has also spoken about his experience of being an apprentice and then moving forward and now becoming a very, very able and successful politician here, speaking up all the time, as he will be this afternoon on many different issues. But it is about anyone with any kind of leadership role and responsibility. We all have it, our citizens as well, to take this forward. So I just want to say again, the work of the Wales TUC is so important. We'll hear much more about it than you need to hear from me. I think the No Grey Area report also, published by Welsh Women's Aid, highlighting the scale and impact of sexual harassment experienced by women in the workplace. We discussed this last year, didn't we, Joyce, when you brought us together? And it is simply not acceptable that 4 in 5 women in Wales have experienced some form of workplace sexual harassment. And as the toolkit shows, these experiences are often compounded by racism, homophobia and ableism. And it is that intersectional acknowledgement, and clearly we very much our concern as we look at how we can implement the toolkit. Because these experiences have an impact on mental health and well-being, job security, career progression of victims and survivors. And sexual harassment in the workplace violates a worker's dignity, creates an intimidating, hostile, often degrading, humiliating, offensive environment, not only for those who are subject to it, but also for those who witness it. And compounding this, we also know that workers face significant barriers to reporting sexual harassment, often not believed, made to feel like they're overreacting, they can't take a joke, or even that they're the cause of unwanted behaviour they're experiencing. And there are probably people in this room, and we know colleagues who will know that, know what those words mean to them. So this toolkit sending out this clear signal: these behaviours are serious, they're endemic, and they need to stop. But also, the toolkit does more than that, provides people and employers with the tools and the means to effectively challenge this behaviour, to create that lasting culture change that will benefit everyone in the workplace. So we in the Welsh Government, of course, have been clear about our ambition to end violence against women and girls in all its forms, and sexual harassment is part of a wider culture of violence against women. We'll only get to the root cause of these behaviours if we address sexism, misogyny in every part of society, including the workplace. And that's why we have to work together to support and empower those who wish to report sexual harassment, ensuring they don't face victimisation, retaliation when they come forward. We must ensure that employers understand their responsibilities and legal duties, and that they are put into practice, and that women can develop fulfilling and challenging careers free from sexual comments, free from unwanted physical touching and other forms of sexual harassment. And putting survivors at the centre, and at the same time challenging, supporting and educating perpetrators to change their behaviour, to help create working environments that have zero tolerance to sexual harassment. Just a few final words from me, because we need to hear from everyone else here today, and I will be learning from everyone who speaks. But we have expanded and strengthened our Welsh Government programme, committing on violence against women, domestic abuse, committing to include in our strategy a specific focus on workplace harassment. We realised that we needed to do this, and as we published our 5-year national strategy we're now taking forward, it was created and developed with so many partner organisations here today, including the police, and it's great to see Jeff Cuthbert, Police and Crime Commissioner, with us today. All of those in the specialist sector, women's aid, and survivors, crucially, as well as many people at this event. So we're delivering this strategy the next 5 years through what we call a blueprint approach. It brings together the expertise and insight of devolved and non-devolved organisations. So that's going to strengthen the work between public, private and specialist sectors to deliver a social partnership solution to sexual harassment and all forms of violence against women. And I would just say that although policing isn't devolved, we also are addressing this, and Jeff very much engaging with this. We're addressing this in terms of across the board police conduct, for example, taking this very seriously, and discussing this at our policing partnership boards. And just to say, I've written to the Home Secretary to highlight the need for new legislation to strengthen vetting and disciplinary processes in police forces. And this, the evidence and the toolkits, I think, here today will be a very, very useful contribution, because nobody is... Everybody, every employer, every institution, public, private, knows that this toolkit is for them. And that's really what we've got to get over today. So it's a challenge for us to take this forward, but I'm very glad that the Blueprint workstream on sexual harassment is led by Shavanah and also Assistant Chief Constable Mark Davis. And that's a really important partnership, showing what we're trying to achieve. So we must unite to end violence against women, we must unite for change, and we must unite to allow everyone to live and work fear-free. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much, Jane, and that gives a very clear indication of the view from Welsh Government and their perspective on sexual harassment. Our next guest speaker is Joyce Watson MS, sponsoring the event and talking about VAW DSAV, and why she wanted to partner with the Wales TUC on this. So I'll welcome Joyce.
I think the first thing I want to say is I want to thank everybody for being in this room. I've attended many events here over 16 years, and I haven't seen the room this full. So that gives a real indication of people wanting to engage, wanting to do something about this sexual harassment in the workplace. I also want to thank the Wales TUC and Welsh Women's Aid, and it is a comprehensive document that has been produced. And a lot of work, of course, has gone on behind that. It's always easy to look at the end product, but there was a lot of work that happened. And there's no doubt that this is going to help enable union reps to support victims, to hold employers to account and to set standards, and all those things are key. And it will help employers to create safer workplaces if those places aren't safe now. I'm glad to see people here representing many of Wales's workplaces coming together to help make them safer. As well as being the right thing to do, and we all know it is, it also makes economic sense to treat staff with dignity. A safe and supportive workplace, of course, is a productive workplace, and it will keep staff in that organisation. One thing that I think we also have to ensure is a safe place for whistleblowers or for people to call it out. It isn't just about being believed, but it's also about ensuring that you're not going to lose your job as a consequence. And all the figures are telling us that in very many cases, and it is a case of power, harassment is a case of power over an individual who you want to subject it to. And therefore, it is often the weakest, the people earning the least amount of money, the people somehow at the bottom of the hierarchy who are being subjected but are least enabled to call it out. And I know, as I said, there's been an awful lot of work done here. And I want to mention Rhianydd and her team have to be commended for putting this together. We had quite a few meetings, and it was a work in progress. And also Flick Stock and her colleagues for organising this event today. Lots of you in this room have been campaigning with me for years to end violence against women and girls, and Jane Hutt. And, you know, there's been legislation, we've had the White Women campaign, we've had the WI Not In My Name campaign, and many other campaigns as well. And having said all of that, recently, to me, it seems that harassment and misogyny are feeling more prevalent than ever they were before. Baroness Casey's review of the Met Police paints a shocking picture of a boys' club culture where the publicly stated policy to crack down on abuse was not an operational reality. We've had allegations of sexism and misogyny within the Welsh Rugby Union, exposed by the BBC Wales documentary, and it took a public outcry and pressure from Welsh Government for senior figures to step down, so we should see how that proceeds. I've raised at the Senate how other public bodies, traditionally male-dominated organisations, have been accused of sexism. And I'm pleased to see some of those organisations represented here today. South Wales Fire and Rescue Service have commissioned an independent review into its culture and disciplinary processes after allegations of sexual abuse by 2 firemen. The police watchdog is looking at Welsh police following shocking messages between serving and retired officers, and of course Jeff Kirkpatrick is here to listen today as the Police Crime Commissioner for that area. And there have been detailed investigations by the College of Policing, the Inspector of Constabulary, Fire and Rescue Services and the Independent Office for Police Conduct, concluding that there are systemic deficiencies in the way some police forces in England and Wales deal with allegations of sex offences and domestic abuse against their own staff. But I do want to acknowledge the fact that there are people in the room who clearly want to change things. And for some of them, the challenges their organisations face are huge, but they're also very public. We know that those challenges exist in all workforces, but with the help of this toolkit and working together, I hope to see real improvements in these workplaces. To tackle the problem, we've heard from Jane Hutt, the Welsh Government Violence Against Women strategy was last year extended to include the workplace harassment. So thanks for that. But trade unions are key to making sure that employers are doing everything they can to prevent it and giving staff a stronger voice to call it out. And I'm pleased to recall the Welsh Government did protect in law paid facility time that will allow trade unionists paid time off work to carry out this role. And I think it's important to remember that as well. But sexism is endemic, and our workplaces reflect society. We must also look at our next generation. And I hadn't heard about Andrew Tate until his legal case, because I'm not on those platforms and I don't get the algorithms that promote his hate speech. But his pernicious influence is astonishing, particularly with young men. His videos have gained more than 12 billion views on TikTok. I called on the Welsh Government to help schools safeguard girls and encourage all students to question and challenge misogynistic online content. Because if society doesn't address the problems facing boys and young men and help them answer the questions of what it means to be a good man, then predatory people like Andrew Tate will. We know this is and always will be a work in progress. The nature of abuse changes, and that's why I've just highlighted that. And we have to be continually vigilant. We have to adapt our methods of tackling it, and this toolkit will help to do that. But I mentioned the young people because it's the next generation that we always hope to see the change. And I'm sure that with the help of this toolkit, we'll get there. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much, Joyce. I would say just to, I don't know if I mentioned it wrong, but there will be time for questions and answers at the end of the speaker session. The next speaker is Sarah Kirkpatrick from Welsh Women's Aid. They're partners in writing this toolkit, and Sarah will be discussing how this work is important to survivors. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much. This is really exciting being in person, and it's really exciting seeing the toolkit, which is a tangible piece of the last couple of years' work. And I'm not starting at the beginning of my speech, I'm starting somewhere down the middle, because one of the things that I learned in the last 3 years is that we can change anything if we want to. At the drop of a hat, we all learned how to use tech that had mystified us for centuries. That might just be me. We changed our workplaces. We changed our way of interacting. We no longer have stuff on paper. We could use digital devices. We could do anything. And what blew my mind, sadly, is that instead of violence against women and girls being eradicated for people working from home, it just morphed. It was still there, it was still happening, and I'm going to mention our grey area, our no grey area report in a minute. But that blew my mind and also devastated me. Together, as a society, we can end violence against women, domestic abuse and sexual violence, but it will take all of us. But we can do it. And I'd like to acknowledge that there will be survivors, there will be people in this room who are listening going, this is me, I've experienced this, and you're talking out of your hat. I hope I'm not talking out of my hat. I think it's a journey, but I think it's worth saying every single one of us has to play our part in making this different. Welsh Women's Aid are absolutely delighted to have worked in collaboration with the TUC on this particular piece of work. It builds on our no grey area work, where we surveyed the population and actually quantified how much sexual harassment was being experienced in the workplace. And as I say, it absolutely blew my mind. 4 out of 5 people said that they had experienced some form of sexual harassment in the workplace. The vast majority of people had actually experienced sexual harassment from more than one perpetrator. This isn't a few bad apples. This is endemic, and it will take all of us to make a difference. We know that for those women who are from the LGBT community, for women who are disabled, for women who were black or minority ethnic, they reported that they faced even greater sexual harassment combined with other forms of harassment, so like ableism or homophobic slurs. So we were fully aware when we got the results of the No Grey Area campaign that the workplace, a place where we go to contribute to society, to generate money and to hopefully go home feeling like we've done a good thing, that shouldn't be a place where we get abused, harmed and struggle to tolerate an environment, and yet that's what we heard. So we're really pleased to work with the TUC, and one of the things that's really exciting for me today is seeing a really different audience to the audience I usually see. Welsh Women's Aid has a particular brand, a particular identity, and it resonates with a particular group of people perhaps. And the TUC, I think, does something similar. And I think the important part is that when we come together, we amplify each other's voices, we start to share, and we start to recognise, and we start to collaborate. And this work signifies the need for a cultural shift throughout workplaces, and we shouldn't be working in silos, we shouldn't be looking at things as their problem or our problem, it's all of our problem. So I'm going to move on to talking about responses. There's some really, really useful guidance and suggestions within the toolkit that we hope will be taken on board by employers. The idea about how to take a person-centred approach and a trauma-informed approach to listening to survivors when they come forward and say, I need some help. But also having a robust understanding of within your workforce, you do not necessarily just have someone who is disclosing and experiencing abuse. You have someone potentially within the workforce, or potentially a customer or a service user who is bringing that harm. So employers and workplaces must understand how they robustly but fairly hold perpetrators to account and have mechanisms to achieve that. But as we reduce our tolerance of just banter and misunderstanding, and it was just a joke, then hopefully we will reduce violence against women, sexual harassment within the workplace across the piece. We know that survivors are more likely to disclose more than once before they reach out for help and support. We hope that the more this message gets out there, we can get it right. Someone can disclose once, they can get the right help, the right response, the right support, stop abuse and harassment in its tracks, and thus leave people with less trauma, not no trauma, but less of a negative experience. Some of the things that we heard back from within the No Grey Area report included, I was asked to resign from my job. He became very upset and attacked me. The idea that someone who has been victimised and harassed is left being responsible for that harm is really problematic. And finally, I just want to talk about language. We have to name the problem. One of the things that I particularly enjoy, and for those of you that have met me before, you will hear me raging about it in a variety of spaces, is an acronym. I'm not a big fan of an acronym, because we take the power out of the words. Valdoresti trips off the tongue. Violence against women, domestic abuse and sexual violence. That is what we're talking about. So we must name things. And we must not dismiss them as jokes or as banter or as a misunderstanding. We must call sexual harassment what it is. It's a form of sexual violence. It's not a mistake, it's not a misunderstanding, and there is no such thing as low level. It is a problem, and we need it to end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That's very enlightening. I appreciate that. And I agree with you about acronyms, actually. And that's a good point made. I just see Jane has had to leave the meeting, unfortunately. She's got other business to attend to. But moving on swiftly to our next speaker and the architect, if you like, the person who's been driving this forward. And the reason why we've got this toolkit in front of us today is Rhianydd from Wales TUC. And he's going to speak to us about why trade unions need to work on this issue in the workplace. So welcome, Rhianydd.
Thank you very much for being here today. I'm so pleased that we're finally at this point where we're able to launch this toolkit. It's been something that we've worked on for such a long time. And we first approached Welsh Women's Aid around 2 years ago, and we asked if they'd be happy to work with us, and we were delighted when Charlotte Archibald started drafting and developing the toolkit with us. So our first thanks are to Welsh Women's Aid and to Sarah Kirkpatrick and the team at Welsh Women's Aid, but specifically to Charlotte for being a great partner and a co-author in this work. Today I want to spend a little bit of time talking about why trade unions are campaigning on sexual harassment and what you should expect from this toolkit. So you've all got a copy and they're more available if you'd like them. So on a personal level, I first reported sexual harassment to the police when I was 7 years old. And a man exposed himself outside the school gates when I was waiting for my friend to arrive in the morning. The last time I reported to the police was in January, and I was looking after my 5-year-old daughter's school friend while her mum contacted the police because her daughter had been exposed to swimming lessons. So in both examples, there's been no consequences for the perpetrator. So I've known for a really long time that sexual harassment is an issue, like many others in this room. But we wanted to check if this was a workplace issue too. So this work started, like a lot of our other work, with surveying people in Wales. And we wanted to hear from everyone, trade union members, non-trade union members, people with different genders, ages, races, sexualities and disabilities. Now, our findings were, as always, predictable in some ways, but surprising in others. For example, we found that this was a typically gendered problem, meaning that mainly women responded, and it was mainly women who reported examples of sexual harassment. Not always, but mainly. We found that being sexually harassed was reported by women of all ages, but that the types of harassment changed massively based on her age. Street harassment was also far more prevalent than we had previously thought, and many workers either didn't report this, or if they did, their employers didn't really care about it or think that it had anything to do with them. Now, the likelihood of street harassment increased massively if someone worked in the early hours or late at night, and if the job that they didn't have a proper contract, so they were working a zero contract. So this is a particular concern when you realise that black women in particular are the most likely of all workers to be on a zero contract. We hear from gay men who told us that their sex lives had become something that others they worked with felt that they could talk about. We hear from disabled women who found barriers in reporting sexual harassment or feeling gaslit because when they were told that the sexual harassment that they were disclosing, they were told that they were just being offered help. You know, well, they knew different. It wasn't help, but they were being gaslit. So this evidence gave us the push forward to create the toolkit that you now see in front of you. And it's divided very clearly into two main sections, with information first and then more practical tools second. So it's also colour-coded as well, which pleases me, so that employers, workers and trade unions know exactly what's expected of them, simply by just looking at the colours. So our designer Frank Duffy has worked really closely with us on this, and I know Frank's not in the room, but we'd really like to thank Frank for their work, because I hope that you'll agree that for quite a large document it's quite easy to flick through and find something that hopefully is very useful to you. Now, the information section incorporates months of research that Charlotte and I carried out, where Welsh Women's Aid gave us the benefit of their years of experience. You'll find definitions of sexual harassment, a section on the law, a very up-to-date explanation on what the current Welsh Government position is, and we've tried to answer really important questions like, what are perpetrators, what's the manosphere, and what are the responsibilities of trade unions? Now, as many of you in the room will be aware, trade unions have been taking sustained action to put our own houses in order on the issue of sexual harassment. And many of you will have read the Kennedy report for the TSSA, the Monaghan report for the GMB, or the, which are both affiliated unions, or the RCN report on sexual harassment. They are scathing and painful for us as a trade union movement to read. But it's important for us to never shy away from having difficult conversations, and our discomfort is never more important than the safety and protection of our union workers and members who've experienced sexual harassment. Now, we've seen the GMB make massive inroads with their task force, and they've really faced this work head on. So I really want to commend the GMB for that. It's wonderful to see. Some of you in this room might think that sexual harassment is an issue which will hopefully die out, as our society becomes more equal. After all, more women are working in the workplace now, and there are action plans like the Welsh Government Anti-Racism Action Plan, the LGBTQ+ Action Plan, a future task force on disability, and they're looking at systemic issues of racism, homophobia, transphobia and biphobia. However, we found painful evidence that it's not only not dying out, but it's actively thriving, both in workplaces, but within a culture of misogyny that we all live in. We saw evidence, and Joyce alluded to this, of online influencers with huge followers, pushing out messages to hundreds of thousands of mainly young followers about how to treat women, how to expect that women act. Now, we found homegrown Welsh influencers. This is not, something that's far away, with over 200,000 followers, and he was giving out messages on women shouldn't go out to a club, they shouldn't earn more than a man, they shouldn't dress, or they should dress in the way that you want them to, they shouldn't speak to a man in a certain way, and you can imagine how narrow that way is, and they should certainly never be considered equal to a man. Now, this isn't a problem that's in prison in Romania at the moment. This is here. And these influencers influence men that we work with. And teachers are telling us that they influence our children too. This behaviour, it taps into coercive control and is one of the 8 recognised behaviours that we know is common in every domestic homicide case. So this work is not only crucial for protecting our colleagues now, but for helping protecting people from domestic abuse too. The second section of the toolkit gives much more practical actions. So we began developing detailed training for our trade union reps already and our trade union tutors on these actions. And I really hope that, given that there's so many of you here today, that means that you want to show commitment to working with us and developing this within your union too. But I'd really like everyone in this room to take a look, particularly at the tools section, and see what you can change in your own workplace. Like, make it a mission to go back to your own workplace and see what you can do. We believe that there's something that everyone here can do. And this leads me into our wider campaign. So this toolkit is only the start of the beginning of our work on sexual harassment, certainly not the end. And we've started compiling a list of areas where we know there are things to change. How we collect data, how we protect signposting opportunities, how we provide support at a policy and a practical level. But we need you to help us make those changes. Now, it could be at the Zenith, within your union, Westminster level, or within your workplace. We just need to join together and unblock those barriers that help people access justice. And we need to start creating that preventative environment where we stop the culture of sexual harassment before it happens. Now, we're trying to stop a tidal wave here, so it will take all of us to do this. But I'd like to leave with a note of optimism. But finally, I'd like to finish with a few more thanks. Thank you to union members who've been brave enough to bring this issue to the forefront. Thank you to Lindsay at the Wales TUC for proofing this toolkit, and huge thank you especially to Flick, who many of you will have contacted today, because she's been amazing at getting this toolkit produced, for organising this event today and generally organising every piece of public information that you'll see on this. But thank you to the Wales TUC and all the speakers today, because it's been wonderful, and whenever we've asked for support, it's always been there in abundance. So finally, thank you for coming today, and I really hope that you find this event useful and that it's resonated with you in some way, and that you feel really energised to go back and make that difference that we know we need to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rhianydd. That was very interesting and really gives us a better understanding about how we're going to be able to use this toolkit in the workplace. I'll move on to our next speaker. Everybody, I think, will probably know Shavanah from who's the General Secretary of the TUC, and we'll be perhaps talking about the wider context of this issue as well. So thank you.
You've already heard the thanks to the team, but I'll do it again because Flick's going to kill me otherwise. So Flick actually organises my life, actually, not just work related. Just to say that, that's probably a bigger thank you, actually. What's quite interesting is that Rhianydd started off by talking about her personal experience at the age of 7 and what happened to her. I'm sure there are many people in this room who probably equally have a story that they could share or choose not to share, or you're going to have memories that come back to you. And what will also come back to you is that feeling of not knowing whether what you saw or you felt at the time was normal, whether that should have actually happened. And equally, there may have been a feeling where there was a sense of shame and confusion, and you're not quite sure who it is that you should be telling or not telling, or are you, or perhaps you're oversharing, or the adult that is meant to be there to protect you is the person that is doing something to you at that time. The good thing now, though, is that given that we are very much centering the individual, some would say the survivor, others would say the victim, in the work that we are doing is really important. And I think that the unions have we've definitely gone a few steps faster than maybe we would have otherwise, because women within the movement themselves have now spoken out, and they've spoken out publicly. And because of the fact that we do have, on one hand, of course, you see the negative aspects of social media, where you have the likes of Andrew and others, you know, being able to have an audience. These women also use social media actually as a means to share their personal stories, because they felt that, you know, they'd gone to their union and their union had failed them. Or in some instances, the unions were their employer. And there wasn't the support structures and the policies, etc., in place that would protect them. And you know, Joyce was talking about whistleblowing in particular. And again, we see this, you know, even when it comes to race. And there is a real intersectional aspect to all of this, because even with some of the work that the unions themselves have done, they've seen that actually there are lots of intersectional issues here, right? Particularly in relation to race, disability, and other aspects as well. So we've got to see the full picture, but we've also genuinely, we've got to normalise feeling uncomfortable. And it can't just be for today, because we're launching a really important toolkit, but it's got to become our normal. And that includes being feeling uncomfortable as a leader. And when you are in leadership, it is very important that you stick to the position. And when your organisation is called out for bad behaviour, such as sexual harassment in the workplace, that one, you don't turn the other cheek and say it's too difficult, but you face up to it. And you don't pass the buck to the next person, but you carry the can. And if you can't carry the can, then ask others whether they can share the burden of carrying that can with you. And actually, if you are the perpetrator, that you put your hands up and you own up to what has happened. Because believing people, eventually it all comes out in the wash. One way or another, everything always comes out. And sometimes it's because of events like this where we're talking about these issues and people do feel triggered. And that they equally, all of a sudden, feel brave enough to speak to somebody else about it. Now, the TUC itself, we've made our position very, very clear as far as the Wales TUC is concerned, that sexual harassment will be a priority for our work going forward. At every single General Council meeting, we will have this issue on the agenda. So that's going to be something that we definitely The other thing is that, you know, we had the General Secretary of the UK TUC, Paul Novak, visit Wales recently. And I said, and we were talking about this issue, and I said to him as well, I said, it's all fair and well that we are doing the work in terms of supporting the union movement, but the TUC itself as an employer also has a responsibility. You need to have the correct checks and balances in place, and perhaps sometimes we shouldn't have to wait for an inquiry before we start looking inward. You should actually look around you and think, if this is happening elsewhere, could it be happening in our workplace too? Is there something that we should be doing differently? Can we get ahead of this? Can we actually create an environment where people feel safe enough to come out and that they will be believed equally? Now, I know that there's been a lot was said yesterday in the press in relation to the Baroness Casey's latest report into the Met Police. And of course, Jane also mentioned earlier on in relation to police in Wales and needing to look at some of the operational issues there as well, and standard setting and everything else. But I think that this is an issue for all blue light services. It's not just the police here, it is the fire service, it is every other aspect as well. And I think that we can't just keep saying that we're going to do the right thing and then not acting. Now, as a trade unionist, I would say that anyone is entitled to be represented in the workplace and to be supported. But equally, if something is wrong and there is a case for dismissal, then we should be dismissing people from their employment for that issue. And we shouldn't simply be saying, well, this is too hard and we have to wait for the criminal outcome before we act. We need to think about some of this stuff, because actually if we don't do the work internally ourselves, then people start losing trust. And once you've lost trust, especially on an issue that's so difficult for people to come out and speak about in the first place, if they don't have trust that their employer is going to support them and that they will be believed, and that there isn't all of a sudden going to be, you know, a big story in the workplace where everyone is talking about that individual. The individual is then considering, well, do I come back into the workplace? The employer goes, well, it's okay because that person's working from home, so it's different. And the perpetrator is physically in the building, so that's so as long as we've created the space between them and they're in different teams, it will be fine because we've made the reasonable adjustment, okay? And we're handling it. Everything's going to be okay. Well, it's not okay. It really isn't okay. And I've had enough of women in particular saying that, why is it me that's got to work from home? What? Like, I feel like, so I speak about what happened to me, you tell me you believe me, you say that the support structures are in place, but the best you've done is tell me to work from home, and you've given me a phone number, and I'm supposed to dial this number, and somebody's going to answer, and they're going to provide me with some counselling services, and I'm going to be okay. They're not going to be okay. It needs, there is a lot more that needs to be done. And that's why, as far as the this toolkit is concerned, I'd say definitely from pages 39 onwards, there's a section specifically about what can trade unions do. There's some checklists in there as well. And one of the things that we've been talking about internally is that we have to make sure that when it comes to these matters, that they are considered to be collective bargaining issues. And we shouldn't simply be waiting for our annual pay negotiations before we can talk about things either, right? So in the same way as quite often, as we will see when it comes to cases of equal pay, people will say, well, we'll look at that in the next round. Well, on something like this, we can't look at it in the next round. We can't wait for the next report. You know, Baroness Casey, you know, God, I don't know how many reports and reviews and various other things she's done over the years that I've personally been involved in, because actually before I became a trade union official, I worked in the third sector. I've done a lot of work in terms of supporting people who have been sexually harassed, abused, and so forth as well. And I think that we've got to now be very, very clear that employers have got to take reasonable steps, but also they've got to take some bold steps. Don't be scared to upset people because you're doing the right thing. And we have to, in these situations, put our personal friendships and our allyships to a side and do the right thing. Now that might make you unpopular, because doing the right thing is hard, right? There's going to be a lot of people who will say, oh, you've overpushed that. It wasn't, you know, in our day it was different. And oh, when I was younger, it was like this. That made, well, I equally, I'm 46 now. I started as a union official, back in 2002? And I can talk about what was then, you know, considered to be okay and what is not considered to be now. But equally, I know how I felt then is how I feel now. So it's not like my feeling has changed. I felt harassed then, and I would feel harassed now. So the difference, though, is that we are talking about these issues, but we're providing the tools and we're providing spaces in which we can have people who can talk about these issues, but also to be protected. Because actually, even if you witness something, it can be a lot to keep, right? And they say that, you know, keeping someone else's secret, and you're thinking, I want to be able to help this person, but I don't know how to. And you have to then respect the individual, because if the individual says, I just want somebody to talk to, I don't actually want you to do anything with this information. But it's a lot. to take on. And so we need to make sure that we then, as a union movement, as the Wales TUC, are providing proper safe spaces where you can share that information on an anonymous basis. And if it means that actually we are continuing to hear, for example, that a particular sector or a particular workplace or even within the union movement, there is an issue, at least we know and we can act accordingly. Because acting and doing the right thing and pushing ahead with this is what is going to change things. Otherwise, nothing, absolutely nothing moves, nothing shifts. So to every single person out there who's a leader, who comes to these events and says that I'm an ally, wears a ribbon, or we don't want performative, gesturing, politics, and we don't want any of that. We just want you to do the right thing. So thank you everybody for coming for today. Sorry for going on one, but this stuff is really important. And make sure you pick up a copy of this. Thank you.